those two come together to create this third condition. Now, I want to share some of the backstory because this has been not just an academic and experimental process for Ron Carey, David Allen, myself. It's been very much an action learning process. We've had the crucial conversations along the way. So a number of years back, Carrie and I were working on the chapter of a book, and we had a little process we'd agreed on that I'd take a first write, he'd do rewrites, he'd send it back, and then we'd get on the phone and discuss. So we'd done that process. We got together on the phone on a Saturday night, 7 o'clock, and I'd sent the chapter over to him, and he sent it back to me, and so we began the conversation. I said, "So Carrie, did you get the chapter?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "You ruined it." I said, "I didn't ruin it, I fixed it." He said, "You didn't fix it." He said, "It's all disjointed now. It goes from A to E to F." I said, "It's not disjointed." I said, "It's meaningful now." Now, how long did that conversation take? Did anybody time it? It was about 8 seconds, yeah. And all that happened that quickly. Now, the irony is, the chapter we were working on was called Master My Stories from a book called Crucial Conversations, of all things. So we were action learning our way through this, realizing these moments mattered a lot. The big idea that started to emerge from our work is that you can measure the health of a relationship, the health of a team, even the health of an entire organization by measuring the average lag time between identifying and discussing problems. That's what began to emerge from our research. And we began looking at ourselves from that same perspective. What about our relationships? What about our marriages? What about our families, our organization? What's the average lag time between identifying a problem, feeling it, and it getting on the table in a healthy way? To put it graphically, it looks kind of like this. So we all kind of walk along through life and we all have our white Volkswagen van moment when we have this super awesome goal that we decide to go after. So we start marching happily towards it. Inevitably, on that march, we encounter these moments. Why? Because there's something by definition of high stakes on the table. The instant you have a super awesome goal, by definition, there will be moments where the stakes are high, where people disagree, and then it becomes an emotional, visceral process. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've learned is that the best way to minimize the number of crucial conversations you have in life is to have a meaningless life. As soon as you go after something important, they will occur. It turns out that at about age 3 or 4, you and I start to believe that you frequently have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. And that one belief causes mischief for the rest of our lives. That's the controlling assumption that dictates how we show up in interpersonal situations from that moment forward. And that's why these moments of disproportionate influence have such an enormous effect. David Chase and I did a research project a few months back. We asked people across the world, if you had a magic wand that would eliminate consequences for just one conversation, so you have a permission now to say one thing, anything you want to anybody you want, and there will be no consequences. Who would you say it to and what would it be? I want you to look at some of the responses and speculate for a moment with me about the consequences of these moments of disproportionate influence. So here was one. To my boss, for 8 years you single-handedly drove away every good employee we've ever had. I can no longer tolerate your condescending tone, your passive micromanaging, your overt verbal sexual harassment towards female employees, your hypocritical management or work time, or even your insincere compliments. Affectionately, moi. Now, here's what I want you to think about. What is the cost or consequence of keeping that in a vault? And how is it showing up today? That's what we began to notice. Second, to my wife. We've been together a long time, but it's time for us to consider going our separate ways. Ladies and gentlemen, so many broken relationships are not broken because it was inevitable. They were broken by silence. They were broken because the lag time between feeling a problem and discussing the problem in a healthy way yawned so wide that the relationship broke. To my supervisor, Now, let me ask you the question. What does silence look like in that case? Is silence truly silent, or is it showing up? To my colleague, I betrayed your trust by sharing confidential information that you shared with me with another peer. I apologize. I'd change it if I could. How does guilt show up when it's undiscussed? To the woman next to me, do you have a cat or something that marks your coat, shoes, or bags? There's a really bad odor from you in your desk. It's very nauseating and offensive to me. Now that's a sensitive issue to put on the table. But let's ask ourselves, what is the cost of silence and how is it showing up? The principle that we found over time, the reason these moments have such disproportionate influence is because you and I don't get to vote on how they affect relationships. If you don't talk it out, what do? You act it out. We know that. It shows up in 100 different ways. You sleep on the couch at night and you imagine someone suffering upstairs. If it's not getting discussed, it's getting acted out. It shows up in your behavior like this. Whenever I get mad at you, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper? I just go and clean the toilet, she says. Well, how does that help? I use your toothbrush. To my husband, I feel frustrated by the mess and clutter in our house. I love you, but I can't stand this anymore. I've been patient for a long time. It appears you don't care. In addition, I think you need professional help to deal with hoarding tendencies. I want to get some counseling, and I think you should too. Now I ask us to contemplate for a moment, is silence truly silent? Or is it showing up somewhere? Finally, what if you were the boss and you're carrying this in your vault? Find a different job now. While I can't prove it, I know that you stir up trouble between your coworkers, you don't pay attention to your job, you lack respect for anyone, you take no responsibility for actions, and blame others. What you and I are trying to do in teaching Crucial Conversations, at least at the very basic level, is simply this. One simple concept that can dramatically change how people show up in crucial moments is just to read the title of the book. Because it causes us to do this, to start for once calculating the costs of silence, for once realizing silence isn't truly silent, to just carefully and thoughtfully list what are the costs right now, how is it showing up, and what is the default future if this continues to go undiscussed. That's what you and I are doing in the world. What we're trying to help people do is take a more mental, conscious calculus of the real costs of the decisions they're currently making. What you and I know is that crucial conversations aren't just a pit. They aren't just a problem to get over. They actually have the potential of becoming one of the accelerants of intimacy. Crucial conversations, well held, accelerate the building of trust between individuals. They not only don't damage it, they actually create a sense of connection with people that can't come most any other way. And yet, here's how we continue to look at them. The contribution you and I are trying to make to the world is to help them understand that it's the pathway to the super awesome goal, not just something that keeps us from it. So the first big idea that we came across was this: the vital behavior that enables most any organizational outcome is just candor. It's just showing up in those moments. And you've seen the research across so many different domains. You and I are saving lives, we're saving relationships, we're reconnecting families, we're building teams and organizations just by getting to look at that one moment a little bit differently. This has mattered to Vital Smarts as well. I remember the moment that I believed we could make it as a company. It's because after the Crucial Conversations book came out, there was a moment at which Yan Wang, our CFO, who comes from a tradition and background that does not encourage candor with people in positions of authority, it took immense effort for her to approach Al Switzler and say to him, Al, you've been taking books along on all of the book tour things and selling them at the back of the room to try to help promote things, and that's really well and good. But when you come back with a whole bunch of written credit card numbers and checks, it takes more time for us to process those than it's worth for the money. Perhaps you ought to just give the books away. After she finished that feedback to Al, it looked like she wanted to throw up. That was challenging. It was terrifying for her, and none of us could have been prouder of her. She set a tone for Vital Smarts. She helped us turn the corner and start becoming that kind of organization. We don't always show up perfectly, but we try hard because we know these moments are our lifeblood as well.